Hello and welcome to another episode of Ezoic Explains. I'm Whitney Wright, and today we're going to be talking about why Sellers.json is important and what it is. Sellers.json was introduced by the IAB to increase the trust of the supply side of real-time bidding and programmatic buying. If implemented correctly, Sellers.json serves as a mechanism to enable buyers to discover who are the entities that are either direct sellers or intermediaries in the selling of programmatic digital advertising. Simply put, Sellers.json is a .json file that functions as a way of tracking where the advertising money went. The second part of Sellers.json is the OpenRTB SupplyChain object. This allows buyers to see all parties who are selling or reselling a given bid request. Imagine this as a record of what exactly happened to an impression. It uses a node system that identifies every single vendor who participates in the selling of a bid request, including the final buyer. Sellers.json works through a file. In the file, SSPs and exchanges will have to list all their authorized reseller partners along with the seller ID and any detail on the legal entity that owns that company. You may have heard of ads.txt, which is the easiest way to put your ad inventory for sale by a list of approved sellers. Ads.txt is the supply side of the ad exchange, whereas Sellers.json is the demand side. For example, imagine I'm a buyer buying through an ad exchange. Let's say I'm bidding $1 through Publisher Paradise Network. What Sellers.json allows me to do is see which channel I essentially buy through. The node system with Sellers.json will show me, the advertiser, which channels are taking the least amount of cuts in the buying process. Without that type of transparency, shady players might be in the mix who are buying and reselling those impressions and ultimately are devalued by the time the bid reaches the final seller. In turn, this means the more cuts that are taken from that initial dollar bid also reduce the publisher's payout. Sellers.json is important because it creates more trust on the seller's side. Let's take a look at two different scenarios in the buying and selling process to illustrate why Sellers.json is important. In scenario 1, let's say a visitor hits a publisher's website. This action triggers a bid request. The bid request carries user data that may contain things like demographics. This, along with retargeting for browsing history and more, goes to the ad exchange, Google's ad exchange for this example. This data gets passed to all the advertisers, and they all place bids in real time. The advertiser with the highest bid wins. A Sellers.json file would show the advertiser the direct path of the selling, which might look like this. In the second scenario, let's say an advertiser works with the Best Media Ad Network. An impression becomes available on Google's ad exchange, AdX. So they bid and buy the impression. Then it turns out that the impression was getting listed on AdX from a reseller named XYZ Media, who bought it from the publisher through header bidding. This looks like this. Rubicon Ad Network could have bought it for their advertiser directly through AdX, which would have then gone directly to the publisher. With scenario 2, there's an extra intermediary in the middle between the advertiser and the ad exchange. Sellers.json would give you an idea of how many paths you're going through to purchase that ad inventory. So, as an advertiser, if you bid $1, what are the chances it's going to get cut down to 60 cents before it gets to the publisher? If intermediaries are siphoning value from the mix, you might not be competitive at that price as an advertiser. This is why Sellers.json is important. In general, the digital advertising space is filled with hundreds, if not thousands, of players who siphon value, yet the value they give back to publishers is vague and often hard to quantify. This is why the display LUMAscape is so bloated. The biggest thing to understand with some of these shady players in the display LUMAscape is that Google's first price auction has taken a big bite out of their relevance to publishers. You're going to see DSPs and SSPs start to use new creative buzzwords to try to hide what they actually do. Few are actually adding value, and even when they are, the value that these ad demand sources provide are incremental at best, and likely not worth it. It's important to remember that publishers themselves do not need to have Sellers.json on their sites. The entities selling their inventory are the ones who have to implement Sellers.json. Additionally, publishers can opt to have their information confidential. For those who use Ezoic, the ad inventory has been verified server-side. The supply chain and path looks like this. Having Sellers.json is a stamp of transparency that allows the industry to use them as identifiers of quality on the supply side of programmatic advertising. And that's it for this episode of Ezoic Explains. Thanks so much for watching. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn. You can also find us at ezoic.com and ezoic.com/blog. This has been another episode of Ezoic Explains.